Welcome to today's episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Hartrum from Pentwater PD in Michigan. I'm really looking forward to having him on today's show. He has some really interesting things that he's doing organizationally, but also a really interesting story. So welcome to the show, Chief Hartrum. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks. Good, nice to be here.
Of course, I did not ask you offline, how long have you been in this career?
This will be my 41st year.
Wow. Does it
Yes.
feel like 41 years?
Some days. Some days not, some days yes, all depends what's going on.
It's really interesting. I talk to a lot of people from all ages, but I find it to be really interesting because, and I'm sure you can relate to this too. We can all relate to this, but the younger men and women who I talk to who are, maybe a couple years on the job, they're like, "Yep, like I'll never be old. Like I'll never like the future's for another day." And then we all who have, aged
Mhm.
get to that day and it feels like it's a blink. And so it's really interesting where I'm like, you just wait, you're going to blink and, 10, 20 years are going to pass by and you're
Well,
not even going to know it.
yeah, I'll tell you, for a while I was working over in Mount Pleasant, which is in Isabella County. And I remember we went to they have a store over there, a new donut shop. They were having a grand opening, and so I went over to the shop, and the front window of this store was all this old police equipment, you know. And I remember looking at it, and I'm like thinking, no, I use that, and I use that, and I use that, and they're like billing this as old time stuff, and I'm going, oh, I don't
Yeah.
know how old that is, but yeah, it goes
Yeah.
fast.
Do you know what's crushing me right now is
Mhm.
that um, fashion wise, all the things I wore in high school are now popular again.
I
And
know.
and they're like, it's vintage from like
Yeah.
2006. And I'm like, no, you did not just call me vintage. Or, it's like so weird to like where people are like, yeah, it's like they said anyone born in the 1900s are old. And I was like, the 1900s, that's how the young people are talking about us. Like
Oh
that's
yeah,
crazy.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm vintage. I'm right there with you.
Well, if, if
I'm
you're
antique.
vintage, if you're vintage, then I'm like prehistoric in that frame. But
Well, give us a little bit of background. So, what got you interested into law enforcement 41 years ago, and what
well, I'll
your
tell
career
you,
looked like?
when as I was ending my high school career, I was on, I was in the football team, and I was an athlete and a lot of things, and I really liked the action of it, the adrenaline of it, and so law enforcement sounded like that I could get the same kind of thrill out of doing that. And so that's how I did it. It wasn't really any more simple than that. It was I went on to there to go to college, and I spent 4 years, and then um, at Michigan State, I went to Michigan State, and you don't end up certified when you come out of Michigan State. So then I had to go to a police academy. So I went to Mid-Michigan Police Academy, which was in Lansing, and graduated from that, and then ended up, here in Mason County, which is just north of where I'm at now. And so started there in '85, and it just kind of went through. So yeah.
What do you think the key to longevity in this career is so that you can make it 40 years and still love what you do?
Well, for me, I would tell you that personally, I would not say that I've made it 40 years by any master plan, but it's more survival than it is, good planning from my part. Um, and I think that's true with a lot of police officers. I think, if you make it to 25 or 30 or 40, it's not so much it's survival because this will, it will really take the wind out of your sails. And you do pay a price on it. You don't see it so much when you're younger because everything you're full of piss and vinegar and everything is new and you want to do everything. But if you pay attention to the officers that are around you, and when I first started at the sheriff's office in Mason County, my whole crew was older guys, you
Yeah.
know, and you could tell that they had paid a price, both personally in their personal lives and just physically. And you could tell they were all aching, all aches and pains and bent over and all the things that kind of I'm going through now, they were going through at the time. So you could see the price of it.
Yeah. How do you think that we can change the conversation and make it more about thriving versus surviving?
Well, I think the whole culture's changed.
Mm,
When I came on board, that was the late 80s. Okay. So there wasn't, nobody was talking about getting a health club membership, or nobody was talking about going to, seeing a counselor or critical stress debriefing. Now, those were all new kind of things. Nowadays, I think everybody takes that for granted. I think some guys literally take that for granted that that's there, but that was not always the case. Um, I can remember early on, I'd been on the road for maybe 3 years, and I responded to a suicidal call, and it was a classmate of mine. We had played football together, and my partner and I went there, I was on a first name basis, known this guy for a long time, and he shot himself right in front of me, a headshot. And we just went back to work. And fortunately, we had another officer, and after that incident, I'd gone over to his house, and he's like, "Well, how's your day going?" I told him what happened. He's like, "Why are you still working? You need to go home."
yeah.
you know. And through his influence, that all the officers that were on that call, we ended up doing a critical stress debriefing, and it was very valuable. And that was that was what, 3 years, maybe 2 years on the job. That was the first time that I'd done that. So,
Yeah. Well, good for them to,
mhm.
you
Yeah,
know, to not invalidate you and to be like, hey, like, actually,
yeah,
we
yeah.
need to take a step back here. One of the things you said earlier that I kind of wanted to circle back to, which I think is really interesting. You said that you started to see the people who had been on the job and in this career a long time and kind of what that had done to them physically, mentally, emotionally, kind of breaking down in all aspects, injuries, aches and pains, all those things. And I think it's really important for us to have those moments in our life and in our career where we take a look around at everyone else around us and we try to identify what are the things that we want to emulate? Like, what are the really positive things and the things that are worth striving for? And then, what are some of the things that maybe we don't want to emulate at all? Right. And
Mhm,
so, I think if we have those moments of saying, hey, like, I'm noticing that a lot of the people who did come from a generation where they didn't have that as part of the conversation, they weren't, we all know this. Law enforcement, even 15, 20 years ago, I mean, depending on what agency you were with, wellness wasn't a conversation really at all. Right. And so when you see that and you're like, okay, like I see what the result of that looks like, then you
mhm,
can start to identify within yourself and within the organization, what do we want to do better? How can we emulate something that's, more focused around thriving rather than just
mhm,
surviving?
mhm,
So I wanted to point that out because I've had that in my life where I've actually, and I'm not suggesting anybody does this, but I was in I wouldn't even say it was a career, but I was young. I was a professional skydiver. I was, like you said, spit and vinegar, and I had all of the, adrenaline chasing. Like that was my whole gig. And there was a moment where I looked around at everyone around me and the people who were the most successful and the people who were just skating by. And I asked myself, do I want to be like any of these people? Are any of these people worth striving for? And in my mind, I was like, no, I don't want to be like really any of them. So I was like, well, what do I have to do in my life to surround myself with people who are going to make me better and who I want to be like? And I think that you have to seek those people out sometimes. You have to find the people who are doing things really well and then try to find mentorship or try to follow in their footsteps. And then the reverse is also true. Don't follow the footsteps of someone who is, maybe making poor decisions.
Yeah. Well, I was really fortunate in that, and I don't know that I ever consciously sought out, you know,
Mm.
but I was really fortunate that as I progressed through my career and I basically had been on the road a few years, and then I ended up becoming a detective. And I had two really good partners, and they mentored me, as I want to say grew up,
Mhm.
but they mentored me a lot as I grew up in my profession, and absolutely they would. I don't want to. How do I want to say this? It was not. There was such an age difference that it was more of a fatherly kind of thing. And every so often they'd see me kind of go off on this thing, and I can remember uh, one of the fellows that I've been talking about, his name was Bruce. And I can remember Bruce saying, I did something, and I turned around and looked at him, and he reached out and he slapped me in the face as we're going down the road. And I said, what's up with it? He said, don't do that again. He was like, yeah, don't do that again. But they were able to mentor me so that, I got better at my role and better at the job and all that.
Yeah, that's so funny. I think that's a really important reminder that you can learn from anybody. And I've had this conversation recently about the generational divide and how some of the younger generation maybe feels like they can't really learn from like the older guys. I'll put that in quotes. And then the older guys are not connecting with the younger people because they're like, my kids are older than these people, who are walking into
Mhm.
the career. But for you to say that, hey, like I actually had really good mentors who were kind of like father figures. I'm guessing
Mhm.
that they were older, they were, more experienced, and that was a
Yeah.
partnership that you both chose. The older generation, those people who are mentoring you, they chose to take you in as a young person and to show you the ropes. And then for you, you chose to be open and receptive to that. And I think it's really important for everyone, no matter what age or where you are in your career, to understand that we can learn from everybody. And there's so much value in what everyone brings to the table, regardless of age.
Well, I think, I had an officer that I worked with. He just recently passed away. I think he was in the 80s. He was in his late 80s. And he was not, he was not particularly sharp as tack in the box kind of thing. And I remember one night we were doing something, and I was making an arrest or something, and he said to me, "Now wait a second, you have to do XYZ." And I remember thinking, "Oh my God, he actually does know what he's doing." And I remember thinking, I can't discount this guy anymore because he actually knows a little bit. And so, yeah, I learned that early on that you couldn't just, make that assumption that you had to keep an open mind. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that so funny too? When like you understand that you have to check yourself. I've
mhm.
had so many times where someone's called me out or they've said something and I'm like, dang it, they're right.
Yeah, yeah,
And then
yeah.
you're once you see it, you can't unsee it. And it's an obligation then to, be able to change within yourself and to
Mhm.
grow and to listen to that. So yeah, that's so funny. One of the things that we talked about offline was kind of this idea that obviously we all have our own stories. We all have things that we've gone through, both personally and professionally. And you had shared a story with me that was personal to you. And I was hoping that you could share that with our listeners as well.
Well, I think, I spent 23 years and some odd months up at Mason County Sheriff's Office. And during that time, nowadays they have a thing called work-life balance. Yeah, I had none of that. Okay, I was complete work 25 hours a day. And I ended up in 2008 losing an election. And I went from being literally on call for the last 20 years to waking up one day and there was like, oh my God, there's like nothing there.
Mm.
And I was very fortunate. I got another job within just a couple weeks. Ended up on in the middle of the state, about 2 hours away from there, and it was a whole different culture. I mean, an entirely different culture. And so I spent a year over there, and it was very therapeutic to be there and just kind of check myself and have these realizations along the way that some things in life are just outside of your control and they just happen. And you just kind of have to go with the flow. And that's kind of what led me back. That was a 2 hour commute. So I was, my wife was like, this is 2 hours and you're there all week and you need to make a change. This role here opened up in Pentwater. So, and that's how I ended up in Pentwater.
Yeah.
It was just, more matter was closer to home and yeah, so that's how I ended up here.
Yeah.
So it was a
How,
good year. It was a good year to have just to get my head in the game.
yeah. How do you think that this career impacts self-worth and value and, maybe even a little bit of ego?
Well, that was a huge ego check for me. And you know, when you're doing the job, law enforcement is not a job, in my opinion. Law enforcement is a calling.
Mm.
Okay. And I tell these guys that come to work for me, young people, and we've got a mix of women and men that come. And I tell them, I'm not a very religious person, I tell them. And I haven't seen a lot of big miracles, but I've seen a lot of small ones. And you have to keep your eye open because at the end of 20 years or 25 years, there may be five things that you remember out of that whole time where you really changed a person's life.
Mm.
I said, if you can recall those five things, that's a good career
Mhm.
because you are definitely a crusader. And I really view our job as not. Um, it's more continually pushing for the right thing to happen for the right reasons at the right time, and
Yeah.
it's a daily commitment to that. And at the same time you do that, you have to have the understanding that it could all be over tomorrow. It could all be over in 5 minutes. You just
Yeah.
have to go in with that and prep yourself that, you know, I'm going to do this and this could be the result. But you got to just get yourself mentally prepped that, okay, let's go.
Yeah.
Kind of do things. And that is hard. It's hard, especially for young folks that come in because they're not accustomed to being in a fishbowl. And when you're in a very small community, you are in a fishbowl. Even when you're in a big community, you're in a fishbowl. Once people know that you're a police officer, you can't go to the bar and have one beer. You always have had 10. You can't have you run red, you're a terrible driver, even though you may squeak through a red light or something. So you live in a fishbowl, and that is really hard for young folks to realize that they're in that fishbowl.
Yeah.
So,
It's really interesting. And I don't know if I've shared this on this podcast before, but um, before I worked exclusively with public safety and law enforcement, I worked in the public space, and I had worked really hard to get to a point in my career that I was really proud of, and a lot of sacrifice. I didn't have work-life balance either. I didn't know what that was really. I really took a lot of pride in my work ethic. And I had achieved some of these pinnacles in my career. And I decided to leave the public space and exclusively work with you guys.
mhm.
And I struggled with that decision because I was doing both for a while, and I struggled with that decision because I was like, man, what is everyone going to do without me? Like everyone loves me, and I'm doing such a great job, and I've reached these pinnacles and all these achievements, and I'm helping all these people, and and I had this like narrative that I had told myself, and maybe to a certain extent some of it was true, but I struggled with that decision, and I ultimately made that decision. And the day that I decided to step away from the public space and work exclusively with you guys, everything disappeared and nobody cared. And
Oh, absolutely.
nobody called me, no one checked in with me, no one cared. It was like I was there today, gone tomorrow. And that was so difficult. It really was like when you said it was like a kick to the ego, or like,
Oh, yeah.
it was so challenging. And I was like, wow, like was I like just was I not valuable at all? Did I not do good work? There was this kind of like mental struggle that I had with that for a while. And mind you, when I stepped into this space, no one knew who I was, and everyone was
Mhm.
like, who's this girl? And like I wasn't getting that like external validation in the way that I was previously. It was very, very difficult. And what I realized over time is two things can be true at once. The work that you do can be really valuable, and you can, like you said, lose it in one day and no one remembers you, but it doesn't mean what you did wasn't valuable. Those things can both be true at the same time.
Right, right.
Um, and I struggle with what you said is you do have to hold on to those moments where people are thanking you. You do have those moments of recognizing that you are making a positive impact, because sometimes they are far and in between. Sometimes they
Mhm.
don't happen. Most of the time, they don't happen all the time. You're going to hear more negativity than positivity sometimes. And so when you said, if you can hold on to those things and remember that you are doing good work, it helps to keep you moving. And I've had to do that throughout my entire career here too. Like I'm not always getting people saying I'm great.
Well, and I think the other thing is the only thing I would add to that is you don't know what you've done that's going to make an impact.
Yeah.
Okay. And I try to tell, my young officers, when you come into work and you put that uniform on, from the second you step outside of the door, you're working. They like to put on their daily log, it's public relations or whatever. And I said, no, there is no public relations here. You are developing relationships. Those relationships are going to be valuable to you. Okay, so you're not, I don't want to say that you're developing assets, but you're developing connections is probably a better way to put it.
Yeah.
And so that's important. You know, most crimes, I think this is still true, most crimes, despite what you see on NCIS or on all these shows, technology is great and allows you to do a lot of things. But most crimes are solved because somebody tells you who did it.
Mm.
It's not more simple than that. And being able to have those connections in the community makes you even more valuable.
Yeah.
And younger officers, they want the best taser and the hottest pistol and the newest whatever it is. And at the end of the day, all that stuff is great. But if you can't communicate somebody, you can't make a connection, you're not going to have that ability to get that confession or get that statement from a witness or have people want to come up to you on the street and say, hey, I saw this the other night. I just thought I'd let you know because I know you're working on something. And those things are valuable, you
Yeah.
know.
Well, and you told me offline that communication is something that you really work on within your
Right.
organization. Can you talk a little bit about that? Why was
Yes.
that something that you brought forward? How do you train that?
So what happened is we went through budget cuts back, oh, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago, something like that. And what they said is you can hire all the part-time people you need in the summertime, but we have to cut your budget.
Mm.
So what we ended up doing is we made a position called we call it PSO, Public Service Officer. and we developed a syllabus for them. And these are 17, 18-year-old kids that come in and we teach them how to use the radio and how to write parking tickets. And when we were developing that, we included a couple other things. We included they go to the historical museum, Pentwater, and they learn the history of Pentwater. They go on an orientation, so they learn all the streets and where everything is at. They go on, they get a presentation from our Chamber of Commerce, so they learn about, what it's like to deal with tourists and visitors to the village. And one of the things we teach them in that class is they have to have five things that they can talk about. Doesn't matter what they are, but every day they come to work, there should be five things that if somebody approaches them on the street, they can start to bullshit about.
Mm.
It might be a football game, it might be a baseball game, it might be whatever. Okay. And it's just something for them to be able to talk. And so what we want them to do is we want them to be able to talk to people, but at the same time, they need to know how to listen. So we tell them it's not really important what you're talking about. What's important is what you hear when you're in these venues and making that connection and getting the name. And so when we started dealing with 17, 18-year-old people, that was a huge problem because the median age in Pentwater is about 65. So it's not like you have two young adults talking. It's like you have, Junior and Grandma talking. Okay. And the other thing is that we have homeless people in Pentwater, just like everywhere else. And we have really well-off people, millionaires in Pentwater. And you would not know that they are, but they are. Those of us that know them would know, we of course know, but these kids don't know who that is. So their goal is for the first year that they come and do that program, their goal is to be able to meet somebody, talk to them, have something to talk about, and get comfortable talking with everybody from the homeless person on the street to the person they think is the be all the end all, the richest person. And we tell them, when you have that comfortability, now we'll go on to the next step.
Yeah.
So what we've learned over time is if we get a kid and they're 2 or 3 years into that program, and we start having them go through the police academy, we sponsor them and they come back to work for us. We get a whole different product. We get somebody that's able to just engage and talk and get information. And when you're a small department, if you're in the city of Chicago or you're in LA and you call for help, you can probably get 25 cars within a couple minutes. Well, in northern Michigan, if you call for help, you maybe got 20 minutes or 15. So you learn to be a really good talker if you get yourself into a tight jam because you just don't have backup
Mm.
that close. And so that has been very useful. The other thing that we've worked on for the last 8 years, we've partnered with our community mental health. So there's a program called CIT. It's a program all over the country, and all of our officers are CIT trained. So when you see the combination of that and the combination is, combine that with CIT training, we see a lot less officer scuffles, use of force, that kind of thing. So it's been very valuable. And recently we went through our accreditation, and part of that accreditation is to have assessors come in from other departments and talk to your staff. And one of the comments I got back from the assessor is, your guys, when we talk to them, they look us straight in the eye. They tell us exactly what they mean. They're good communicators. And, their observation was that's not always what we run into. But, they at least made note of it. So I think that's one of our positives. I mean, I feel absolutely comfortable sending my guys in to deal with somebody in a mental health crisis. And I know that, we're not going to have to call in five cars because all of a sudden they're, you know, in a fisticuffs.
Yeah.
Um, And I've seen it where my guys will go someplace, they'll deal with this person. 2 days later, somebody else, some other agency goes there, they're in a fracas. My guys don't have that problem. They're able to talk their way out of it. So that's been pretty good. Yeah.
I think that communication is a superpower. I really do. And I I like that you said listening to hear and listening to understand. I I've always struggled with anxiety, and I had to learn that skill. It was not something that came easy to me because I was always so stressed and so anxious about my response that I was like, the whole time someone would talk to me, I was listening kind of, but really I was like, what am I going to say? What am I going to say? Like, I don't want to sound stupid, you know? And so I had this whole like internal battle of anxiety. And so I've had to really learn how to communicate. And I think when you have the ability to pause and to listen and to hear, and then to decide how you want to respond in that moment in a calm and collected way, it's a superpower. And it's something that is a trainable skill, I believe.
It is. And I'll tell you, body cameras are an incredible asset for us
Mm,
because, there are some times we'll only have one officer on, but he's got that body camera on. And so we can go back over that the next day and we can kind of critique it about, what happened here. And did you see what was going on here, or were you too caught up in the moment?
yeah.
And even our interview room, when we interview people, I'll have those guys. One guy will sit outside the interview room and watch and just take notes
Mm,
because inevitably, when you're in that interview, you're getting caught up in what's going on and you're going to miss things.
mhm.
And so they're able to work together and hopefully pick up on everything. Um, the other thing that I don't want to say keeps me young, but it keeps me young is I will tell these guys, and I'll say to them, I could be wrong. When we're discussing how to do something or what to do next, and I'll pitch an idea and I say, I'm not saying I'm right. I could be absolutely be wrong, and
Mhm.
sometimes I might actually say something that is wrong just to see if they'll correct me.
Yeah.
And more often than not, that has gotten to a level of where they're comfortable with me enough so that hopefully they'll able to speak up and say, I think you're a little off here, Chief. We need to think about something else, which
Yeah.
probably saves my bacon every once in a while.
Well, I think also just having like the humility to even say that like I'm not perfect and
Right.
I actually could be wrong and I don't have all the answers. My question for you, and this kind of popped up while you were talking, is, and I'm curious your opinion, but do you think that communication training is safety training?
I Yes, yeah, I think it is. I think you know I think officers need to be able to communicate, and I think they have to practice. It's like any other skill; it's a perishable skill.
Mm,
And so they need to be able to communicate because it's not just what you say, it's how you say it, it's how you present yourself. One of the other things that we talk about is, if you get challenged on the street and people ask you why you're doing a certain thing, you need to have an answer about why you're doing whatever it is you're doing.
mhm,
And one of the things I tell these folks is, if somebody asks you why you're doing it, you should have an answer why you're doing it. It should make sense. And it adds to the legitimacy of what we're doing, you know. Um, and since we have an older population, so for the people that are going to listen to this, we go from about 800 maybe in the wintertime to literally over the course of a week, we'll go to 4,500 and then maybe on a really busy weekend, 10,000. Okay, depending on what's going on in the summer. So we get an influx of people from all over the country, much bigger agencies. And they will come to Pentwater with an expectation of, okay, well, I'm in Mayberry now, and they can't do this and they can't do that, or they won't know how to do this. And some of them are quite shocked because, we're small, but we do chicken right. We know what we're doing. And So it's important for them to be able to, when they're confronted with that, be able to say, yeah, this is why I'm here.
Yeah.
This is what I'm doing.
I like that you said that it's a perishable skill. Um, I think that communication not only helps with what we've talked about already, but it also helps create a culture within the organization. If leadership can talk to, their team and other people are able to talk to their peers and, there's open lines of communication, then the culture and the organization is going to thrive. And I think everyone has probably been in a situation before where there wasn't great communication and how that felt. But I'm wondering, if you think that agencies and academies can maybe do a better job or add more training when it comes to communication, especially because we know that the younger generation grew up with technology and maybe don't have the same experience with communication. I've noticed that a lot of the younger, not everyone, I don't want to blanket, but a lot of the younger generation almost feel intimidated to talk because they're so used to talking behind a computer or a screen.
Well, I think you can never have enough training.
Yeah,
Okay. So you only have so much time to get somebody licensed and out the door and into the field.
right.
So I think communication has definitely got to be a part of it. Um, for me, I think there also needs to be communication training for supervisors and chiefs.
Mm,
Because for me, for most of my career, I worked around young men or middle-aged men. Okay. Well, I've got several ladies that I've worked with, female officers. And when you listen to, my office is here, the door's open, so I can hear what's going on the other side. And you know, listening to 20-year-old guys talk amongst themselves is one thing. And I'm accustomed to that. Listening to 20-year-old girls talk, okay, I had to get used to that because they talk about different things and they talk in different ways. And so that was something that I had to get accustomed to.
mm,
Um, Nothing good or bad about it. It's just different.
yeah.
A sensitivity you have to have.
The one thing that I think that I've learned over my life and career is that you never arrive, that it's a constant learning and evolving and growing. And that's exactly what you just said is like, even as leaders, how can you continue to develop your communication skills or develop other skills? Because even though you're at the pinnacle of your career, there's really nowhere else to go. You're chief, you're top, but like this idea of how can you still continue to grow it? You never arrive somewhere, there's always room to grow.
Mhm.
My final question is for those younger men and women. So those 20-year-olds that are coming into the career today, maybe they aspire to be leaders one day. What words of wisdom would you share with them? Maybe something that you wish you would have known when you were their age, or something that helped you along the way?
Uh, you know, the phrase that comes to my mind is you listen more than you talk, and you don't always have to say something. A lot of times folks will get themselves in a lot of trouble, not because they did the wrong thing, but because they made a comment that is seemingly innocuous, but had a terrible result. So I I think young officers should never lose sight of the fact that no matter how much technology, how much you do, the bread and butter of law enforcement is talking to people. If you can't do that, you might as well just hang it up
Mm,
because I can teach somebody to shoot and I can teach somebody to drive a car and I can teach them all those things. Okay. But at the end of the day, if they can't talk to the person on the street, they're not a whole lot valuable to me.
right.
Um, and that would be my advice to them.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on here today. I really appreciate your time and sharing about wellness and leadership. So thank you.